Chapter 5. To the King. "We're lost," said Judd. "No, we're not lost," said Plucky. "We are too." "No, we're not." "We are." "We aren't." "Maybe you can climb that cliff," retorted Judd, "but I can't." "Who said anything about climbing?" returned the squirrel. "If you'll look over there to the right, you'll see some bushes. Just beyond those bushes is the entrance to the tunnel." "Tunnel?" said Judd, and he tried to turn and look at Plucky, who still sat on his shoulder. "Yeah," said Plucky, "and it comes out only a few hundred yards from the castle, right by the king's stables. If you think I'm going to spend a day and a half in a mountain with no water and no light, you need to think again," said Judd. "I thought you would do anything for this king of yours," said Plucky. "Isn't that what you told me?" "You're right, Plucky. I'm sorry," said Judd immediately. "But will I fit through the tunnel?" "Once you get inside, I doubt if you'll be able to touch the ceiling," Plucky said. Once Plucky pointed it out, the hole in the face of the mountain was definitely there. Judd could have stood there for ages and never noticed it otherwise. He had to go into the opening on his hands and knees, so Plucky got down from Judd's shoulder and went in ahead of him. Inside, Judd was able to stand upright, and Plucky jumped up again on his shoulder, and they started out afresh. Judd feared the long journey underground, but he remembered how terrible he had felt that morning, and he did not want to mess things up again. He really did want the king and grandmother and Jeremy and the other children to be able to depend on him. When Judd first noticed the faint light shining on the tunnel floor, he thought it came from the entrance of the tunnel itself. But no matter how many corners they turned, there was just enough light to keep them from stumbling. This really puzzled Judd, but he didn't want to seem dumb, so he said nothing to Plucky about it. Plucky didn't seem to think it was strange. He didn't even seem to notice. Judd trusted that Plucky knew where he was going, and he refused to give up the hope that he had in his heart. Minnikin just had to be wrong. "I'm sure the king isn't overthrown. I don't care how things were going last week," he encouraged himself as he ducked his head under a low spot. "I'll bet we get there in time." The cave floor was uneven. Occasionally, Judd slipped on loose stones. Twice he fell. The minor scrapes and bruises he got might have made him cry at another time. He was on his own here, though, with no one to cry to, and he surprised himself because he could take the pain. At one point he rounded a corner and hit his forehead rather hard. He let out a soft moan. "Are you hurt?" asked Plucky. "Not bad. I'm all right," returned Judd, disgusted at himself. He wiped the corner of his eye with his sleeve. He had another nasty lump on his forehead, but he was also more careful. The air was still and humid in the tunnel, and Judd was getting rather warm. It was hard work trudging along without so much as a breeze to cool you. He set his mind on other things and tried to prepare himself for hours more of the same. Then, much to Judd's surprise, a brighter light appeared up ahead. Shortly, they stepped out of the tunnel altogether. Instinctively, Judd drew a long breath as the refreshing breeze hit his face. "Here we are," said Plucky, still giving directions. "The stables are just over there behind those trees." "This has been a strange day," Judd said abruptly, sitting on the ground. "First, I meet a dwarf that isn't supposed to exist anymore. He helps me. Then I meet a talking squirrel. And now a lighted cave turns a long journey into a short hike. I just don't understand." His voice trailed off into a murmur, and he started to shake his head. "Come on, Judd," Plucky said, eager to get going again. "Plucky," said Judd, "this should have taken us a day and a half. We've just done it in an hour and a half, if that long. Even going straight through the mountain couldn't cut off that much time. It must be magic. It has to be magic. I wonder if it's grandmother's magic. Who is this grandmother you've been talking about?" "She's our grandmother, all of the children's. Yours too now," said Judd, perking up some. "She's always telling us great stories about the king. She probably loves him more than anybody. Grandmother can do many great things, but I didn't know she could do this. There probably isn't anything that could surprise me at this point." "Don't you think we're wasting a bit of time?" Plucky pulled on Judd's arm, trying to get him to stand. "Now, it's just over there, beyond those trees. Judd had gone back to thinking about all that had happened to him that day and didn't answer. "I'm only going to say this 3 more times," Plucky said impatiently. "It's just over there beyond." Judd came to himself, though. Quickly, he jumped up and started off in the direction of the trees. Approaching the stables, they could hear the sound of horses neighing and prancing. They sounded frightened. As they came around the trees and into the next clearing, Judd and Plucky saw the most beautiful horses. It almost took Judd's breath away. He couldn't remember seeing animals so beautiful, and he was still full of awe when they approached the stables. The groom, who came striding around the corner, startled him. "Excuse me," said Judd, but the groom didn't acknowledge him. "Stop! Wait! I have to ask you something." Now he was running, and Plucky nearly fell from his shoulder before he caught up with the groom. "Where's the king? Where's the king?" Judd blurted out when the groom turned around. "I have a message for the king, and it's really important." In spite of his haste, the groom looked rather amused and stooped down until he looked Judd in the eye. "Well, sonny," he said, "where did you come from? It's awfully dangerous around here, so you'd better hurry home." "But I came all the way from Grandmother's house in the valley to bring the king this message," said Judd anxiously. "It's a 2-day journey from here, but my friend Plucky showed me a shorter way through a magic tunnel in the mountain. Isn't that right, Plucky?" Plucky didn't say a thing. The groom burst out laughing. Judd wished that this was all a bad dream and that he could wake up from it. "Oh, that's a good one," laughed the groom. "Anyway, the king is much too busy to see you, and I'm busy too. So run along home like I told you to, and play with your little pet there." "Please, sir," Judd was choking back tears. "If I can't get to see the king, Grandmother will die, and we'll lose the war, and—" But he didn't know what else to say. "Well, I can't get you in to see the king. I'm only a groom. If you had a letter of recommendation, you could take it to the doorkeeper, and he would probably do something to help you." I do have a letter," said Judd earnestly. "Where is he?" "Go up there to the guard at the gate. Ask him if you can see the doorkeeper." The groom turned and walked away. Judd was off like a rabbit to the gate, where, after much persuasion, the guard let him in to talk to the doorkeeper. The doorkeeper, a well-fed little man, told Judd that King Isidore was far too busy making his own plans about how to win the war. He could not even spare a moment to hear about a little boy's fantasy. Judd was persistent, though, and finally the keeper asked Judd to step inside, saying he would ask the king about it. "He's not on his way to the king," Plucky whispered in Judd's ear. "Oh, so you're talking again, are you? You sure made me look foolish back there," Judd said rather disgustedly. "I don't want everyone to know I can talk," Plucky explained. "Oh, all right," said Judd. "What was that you said about the doorkeeper, though?" "Well, do you see where the hall turns to the left?" "Yes." "The second door, around that corner, goes into the king's chambers. A guard stands there day and night. My dad and I used to sneak down the other way, where the keeper went, to the kitchen. He'll probably get something to eat, and then come back to tell you we can't see the king," said Plucky flatly. Judd's heart started to pound. They had to see the king, but trying to bluff their way past the guard into the king's chamber could ruin their chances for good. If Plucky was right, though, they would never get to see the king anyway. Without answering Plucky, Judd threw a quick glance at the guard behind him at the gate, who fortunately was not paying attention to them, and headed down the hall. Plucky jumped down and ran along behind. As he walked, Judd was trying to think of what he would say to the chamber guard. He didn't have time to think too much before he reached the corner. "If I act like I know what I'm doing, maybe he'll believe it," he thought. There was the guard, as big as anything, but Judd walked up to him as if he intended to go right past. "Captain Jeremy has sent me to see the king," he said bravely, reaching for the door latch. The guard grabbed his hand. "Not so fast, son," said the guard. "Have you been to see the doorkeeper?" "Oh, yes, I saw him," said Judd quite truthfully. "Then why didn't he escort you here?" asked the guard. "Well, you see—" Judd couldn't think fast enough. A shout interrupted them from down the hall. "Stop that boy! Stop him!" It was the doorkeeper lumbering down the hall toward them. The guard gave Judd a scowling glance, tightening his grip on the boy's arm. "I've got him!" he shouted back. Immediately, he gave another shout. Yow! He let go of Judd's arm and grabbed for his own ankle. The same instant, Judd saw Plucky scampering toward the door, and he knew the little fellow had done him a great favor. Plucky had bitten the guard's ankle. Judd lost no time in flinging the door open and darting in. Inside the chamber, the chase did not end, however. The king's advisors heard the commotion in the hall and were already heading for the door. For a split second, Judd found himself looking them straight in their eyes. Then, instinctively, he began to dodge around. All Judd knew now was that he had to reach the king at any cost. Under the legs of one he went, then around the reaching arm of another, and then another. At last he dove under the table, where he thought he was trapped for sure. Once under the table, he came up against a pair of very large feet attached to a pair of equally large legs. He heard a deep chuckle, and then an equally deep voice called to the council to leave the boy alone. A huge but gentle hand reached under the table and pulled poor frightened Judd out by the arm. It was, of course, the king. "Who have we here?" the king asked, his eyes warm. Judd didn't know if the king was talking to him or not, but he took the opportunity. "Your Majesty, King Isidore, sir, I've made a very difficult journey to deliver this message to you." As he said this, he drew out his letter and handed it to the king. "I'm very sorry, your highness," stammered the doorkeeper, wringing his hands in embarrassment. "Be still, please," commanded the king. He read the letter through, and then read it aloud to his council. As he did, he noted the expression on each of their faces. "Your Majesty, I beg your forgiveness for this intrusion," blurted out the doorkeeper again. "Please, hold your peace," said the king firmly. "Then you must be Judd," he said, looking at the boy again. "Yes, sir," he answered with a bow. "Judd," the king said solemnly, "you have come at an opportune time. My council and I were discussing what to do about this war when you made your entrance. You see, our money is almost gone. That means we won't be able to hire soldiers much longer, and as you know, many of the people who are still able to fight have refused. We have reason to suspect that Turpitude is in much the same condition as we are. We feel sure that their army is dwindling. We also have reason to believe that they are planning some kind of surprise attack. However, we don't know where, when, or even what kind. You can be sure that Jeremy and all the rest of us will do everything we can to see that Altura has the victory," Judd promised solemnly. The council members started snickering at Judd's statement. The king did not laugh, however, but his eyes shone, and he looked at Judd in a way that made Judd believe he understood. The laughter died away quickly, though, as another sound arose. It chilled them to the bone, because that sound had never been heard so close to the castle. Bloodthirsty yells and the sound of metal clashing filtered in through the stone walk of the castle. The sounds were of sword against sword, and sword against shield. The Terps had struck at the most unsuspecting target, the castle itself. The king's first reaction was to fly for his sword. One of the council urged him strongly against it, saying that his life was far too valuable to waste in a small skirmish such as this. The king quickly realized, too, that this kind of attack could only be accomplished by a small band of men. A large force would not have reached the castle unnoticed. No, the king would have been warned of a large force. Almost before these thoughts had finished passing through the king's mind, the battle sounds ceased. The Terps had turned and vanished into the thicket, but the king's troops could not follow. They could not leave the castle unguarded. No one could be sure exactly how many Terps hid out there in the trees and bushes, which ordinarily served as a beautiful setting for the king's palace. Now the forest stood as a living ambush, ready to devour any who dared to penetrate it. It became all too plain to the king. No one had suspected such a bold move. A few dozen men could now win the war for Turpitude. King Isidore did not have enough men on the castle grounds to challenge this hidden army. He knew, too, that the enemy wasn't going to allow messengers out, or worse yet, supplies in. Under ordinary circumstances, the royal household would have been able to hold off for about 2 weeks without a new shipment. These were not ordinary times. No shipment had come in that day, even though one should have. Now they knew it would not come at all. Since the war had waged on and on, food had become less and less plentiful. There was no longer a surplus as in times past. Famine seemed inevitable. Isidore himself had sent a decree that only a 3-day supply of food was permissible in any one household. Greedy people hoarded everything available. The poor would soon have nothing. To prove his good intentions, the king strictly observed the rule himself. Blackguard, however, spread the rumor that he was hoarding all the food in the land and attempting to make himself look good by sending to market every 3 days. Besides, few people believed that the king would be eating common food. They thought he probably gave the food bought at market to the servants. No one had ever seen any fancy foods, or could say for sure where he got them, but many were convinced nonetheless. All of this, of course, was worse than a lie. As the situation stood in the castle, there was enough food only to finish up that day's meals. After that, they had no supplies at all. The king could think of no way of getting a messenger out. Later, when no one came from the castle to buy at the market, people became enraged. They were sure this proved that the king was guilty of breaking his own law. My, the baker sarcastically commented to the butcher near the end of the day. What will the king eat tomorrow? He has bought no bread, not a bit of meat, and no fish or milk. Most likely he'll have to resort to the other things he has on hand. Pheasant, cheese, wine, snapped the butcher.